Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today we're going to get into the last part of Extra History's D-Day series. Coming up next, I'm going to get into Extra History's Bismarck series. I have a song that has been recommended, a half dozen times to get to by Sabaton. I can't remember the name of the song off my head, but it's got a Swedish and English version, I guess. And so I'm going to be doing both of those. I'm trying to figure out how exactly I'm going to do it, if it's going to be one video or two, or how I'm going to split it up. But that's coming up soon. The next video in the Caesar series, the start of the Roman Civil War, is coming up. So, bunch of things going on right now. Like I said, if there's one of these in particular that you're more focused on or want to see more, bear with me a little bit. I'm trying to kind of get through everything as quickly as I can. With all that being said, Extra History, D-Day, the Atlantic Wall from the German perspective is what this video is going to be, I think.
June 6th, 1944 is a day that Field Marshal Erwin Rommel has been looking forward to for a long time. His wife's birthday. With bad weather making an invasion impossible and intelligence suggesting that Eisenhower's waiting for more troops, the commander of Normandy's defenses has decided to go home and surprise his wife with a pair of Parisian shoes. In the middle of the night, his phone rings. The invasion's begun. This episode is sponsored by Wargaming. New players can download World of Tanks and use the code NEPTUNE for free goodies. Link in the description. The Nazi leadership had begun preparing for D-Day even before the Allies held their conference at Tehran. Following a British commando raid at Saint-Nazaire and the landings at Dieppe in 1942, Hitler had realized that even if an invasion lay years off, the Allies were already capable of hitting ports in occupied France. His solution was the Atlantic Wall, a line of coastal defenses that originally clustered around ports but eventually stretched from the Spanish border to Norway. Rather than building a continuous defensive barrier, German engineers drafted 1 million forced laborers from France to create a string of machine gun and artillery positions. These hardpoints had overlapping fields of fire, with artillery intended to fire along the length of the beach rather than out to sea. This allowed the German army to cover a larger amount of territory with fewer men, a consideration that was crucially important by 1944. In late 1943, Hitler had appointed Rommel as overall commander of forces in northern France. It was a political as well as practical appointment, leveraging Germany's most famous general in order to reassure the troops and the public. Rommel also had a personal relationship with Hitler, which allowed him to operate semi-autonomously outside the chain of command. When Rommel arrived, he was shocked at the state of the Atlantic Wall. Command had stripped troops for the Eastern Front, and many of the men were either new recruits, conscripts from Eastern Europe, or had gone soft garrisoning the wine-soaked towns of France.
I talked about this in the video for Audie Murphy that Sabaton did. I think it was in the Sabaton history video. But it really surprises me every time where German resistance is really strong later in the war. The Atlantic Wall in Italy. And the reason why it's so surprising to me is because I know what's happening on the Eastern Front. And so the idea that they are capable of holding, a large front in any other area of the world is kind of crazy. And so it always surprises me when they hold really well. Like it said, the Atlantic Wall is essentially just the idea of defensive fortifications, where the Allies would be landing or attacking on the Western Front. The thing is, the Atlantic Wall, as much as it's technically a continuous wall all the way up through Norway and all that, it really depends on where you hit, because not all defenses are the same. The manpower is not the same. There is a lot of difference depending on where on that wall you hit at any given time. which of course is what Rommel notices when he gets there, is that they're in no condition to fight off an Allied invasion when he first gets to the front. And so he's going to try to turn that around as quickly as possible.
Allied bombing had nullified the Luftwaffe. Rommel went to work. He sent veteran units to supplement the poorly trained divisions. He seeded the ground around the defensive emplacements with mines that jumped into the air before exploding. At low tide, he sank a forest of wooden stakes tipped with anti-tank mines that sat just below the waves. Now, any invader would have to choose between running the gauntlet at high tide or landing at low tide and crossing 300 yards of open beach. He also flooded the low country, erected poles to tear apart gliders, and stationed troops inland to slow the Allied advance in preparation for a counterattack. But planning around that counterattack was a problem. First of all, they didn't know exactly where the Allies would land. Luckily, German intelligence pulled off a coup. They successfully deployed multiple agents in England. Soon, they were receiving reports of armies marshalling to attack Pas-de-Calais, along with diversionary attacks in occupied Norway and... what was the other one? Normandy? Whatever. And aerial reconnaissance confirmed forces massing for these attacks. Of course, every single one of those German agents was actually working for the British. Good work, Garbo. Regardless of where the landings took place, Rommel believed the battle would be decided on the beaches. Should the Allies establish a beachhead, it would be over. In his plan, the divisions defending the coast would slow the enemy down in preparation for a decisive counterattack. As a result, he wanted the Panzer Reserve under his own command, close to the shore in order to sweep the Allies back into the sea. However, Hitler's leadership style started to affect strategy. From his
I talked about this in one of the earlier videos where it went over the beach landings, either the British or the US videos on this series. But Hitler's, I don't want to say inability, because he had the ability, he just didn't have the will, I guess. His unwillingness to see the predicament that they were in on the Western Front, should an invasion force come, kills Germany once the invasion actually comes. And the reason for that is because they have the upper hand when the invasion first gets there. They can immediately deploy a counterattack with their panzers and push the Western Allies right back into the sea, right? In my opinion, Germany's chances of winning D-Day are astronomically higher than the Allies going into D-Day. This decision or unwillingness to hand over the tanks is a huge reason, in my opinion, why Germany ends up, giving up the beaches, eventually losing France. I think they had the upper hand. They could have pushed the Allies back out. But Hitler being Hitler, he worked a situation and made it untenable, and it ends up shooting the Germans in the foot.
Early days in the Nazi Party, Hitler had promoted a kind of social Darwinism among his staff, giving them overlapping responsibilities and intentionally fostering feuds and competition. Yep. This meant that subordinates couldn't amass enough power to challenge him, and it elevated his position as the final arbiter of any dispute. In this case, Rommel was opposed by officers, including the elderly Eastern Front veteran von Rundstedt, who wanted the tank reserves held near Paris. This would keep them flexible in case the Allies landed somewhere unexpected, and shield them from shore bombardment. Rommel countered that the long drive toward the coast would make them vulnerable to air attacks. After fierce debate, they put it to the Führer, who, ever indecisive, created an unworkable compromise. He broke up the reserve, giving Rommel 3 panzer divisions and keeping the larger reserve around Paris as a personal unit.
So, what he basically just did is killed both of the ideas, right? Because the whole thing is the panzers work in force. In force is where they can be dangerous. You splitting them up basically just kills their ability to be, functionally effective when the Allied invasion eventually comes. And the idea that the Allies were going to land somewhere random is kind of crazy to me, because there's only really one small area of France that they could be landing on without you getting a huge heads up that they're coming from somewhere else, right? Because invasions of this sort are so big, they require so much time, energy, manpower, supplies. You would see that build up anywhere else. You would need the ships there. You would need everything there. And so the Germans would have a huge heads up if the Allies were coming from somewhere crazy. There's really just a kind of small beach area of France that they could really be coming from, with their soldiers positioned the way they are right now. So the fact that you cut them up is already dumb, but then the idea that like they're going to come from somewhere random and unexpected, that also seems kind of dumb to me. So this is just a bad situation made worse by Hitler here.
Which couldn't be moved without his express permission. Only one of Rommel's divisions, the 21st Panzer, was sent to Normandy. So the stage is set for June 5th, and the weather could not be uglier. With conditions so poor for both sailing and flying, senior officers relax in the knowledge that the Allies will not arrive anytime soon. Many take the opportunity to rush home on leave, and that is when paratroopers start to land. At 5:30 a.m. on June 6th, German soldiers peer out of their bunkers to see shapes in the morning mist, ships stretching from horizon to horizon. Then, aircraft engines. A massive Allied bombardment rocks the ground as bombs, naval shells, and rockets pound French soil. But the bombers drop too far inland. The rockets fall short. Naval guns make little headway against the steel-reinforced bunkers. 1,745 tons of ordnance drop on Omaha Beach without killing a single German. But the roads inland are wrecked. Worse, Allied paratrooper and glider units land between the static units and the reserve, with resistance elements destroying crucial bridges and rail lines, meaning that reinforcements and supplies can't get through. Landing craft begin to plunge toward the shore. On Omaha Beach, the Germans see the first Allied soldiers trudging in the surf. Machine guns open fire. Far away, Allied soldiers lie face down, pinned, as the first wave of mortars and artillery shells fling bodies into the air. Months of preparation mean that German artillery crews have ranged out the beaches and know exactly where to drop their ordnance. The initial slaughter is monumentally one-sided. One American company at Omaha takes 92% casualties. By 1:30 that afternoon, German observers at Omaha report that small groups of Americans have broken through, but the defense is holding. They're pushing the Allies back into the sea. But Omaha is the exception. Despite fierce resistance, the British have broken through at Sword and Gold, and the Canadians at Juneau. The botched American landing at Utah has reorganized into a chaotic opportunity. Here, the bombardments have had more effect, and the terrain isn't as challenging, but men still die in droves. The chaos on the beach is mirrored at every German headquarters between Normandy and Hitler's vacation home at Berchtesgaden.
I talked about this in a prior video. There's a scene in Saving Private Ryan at the very beginning, I believe. I haven't seen the whole movie, but I've seen this scene 1,000 times. That is of the D-Day landings. It is one of the most brutal things that I've ever seen put to the big screen. It's really wild. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend going and looking at it. And from everything that I've heard from vets of different wars, it is the most realistic, at least American movie on warfare, and with specifically D-Day. It does not shy away from what the reality really was on the ground. And although there are mistakes here and there, even in that scene, they have some defensive works that are goofy, and somebody on set didn't understand what they were looking at. But as a whole, it really does a good job of laying out the bloodshed and how harsh this invasion really was. And also, this is where you need the tanks, right? the all of the other beaches that, you know, people that have made steady progress and been able to get a beachhead, this is where you need the tanks, because these forces have to take the beaches and then meet up further inland. You bottle them up with the tanks, and then you kind of create a corridor and just push them out back into the sea. But when you don't have the tanks there, you really don't have recourse of how to do this, because you certainly don't have just a ton of manpower to throw at it because of what's going on the Eastern Front. So just a very precarious situation here for the Germans, and they need the panzers to stop the bleeding.
Generals argue over whether to commit reserves and where. Rommel is rushing toward the battle in a staff car, unable to issue orders. His rival, von Rundstedt, quickly orders the 21st Panzer to meet the British advancing on Caen, and issues orders for the reserve units near Paris to move out. But his orders are countermanded. That unit can only be moved by the Führer's personal order, and Hitler is asleep. Ever since his days as a Bohemian in Vienna, Hitler has always been a late riser. Rigid procedure dictates that the Führer should not be woken unnecessarily, and even in the face of invasion, no one wants to break this protocol. After all, what if it's only a diversion? When Hitler eventually wakes at noon, he is...
Well, I mean, you know, when you're on a cocktail of uppers, downers, you know, I mean, if you go look at what Hitler was taking at this point of the war, the guy needs his sleep, right? The body probably can't handle it if he doesn't get his sleep. Unfortunately, it's a really bad time. And think about what that means for his military hierarchy, that they are being invaded. They are being invaded, and nobody wants to wake him up so that they can get the tanks out of Paris and to the beaches. Like that always has been crazy to me, how not powerful, but just like how scared to death everybody was of him.
Is thrilled the invasion has arrived. This, he says, is his chance to decisively crush the Allies. And yet, he delays. It's 4 p.m. before he orders the Panzer Reserve to move out. By that time, the clouds have cleared, exposing the column to Allied air power. So instead of advancing, the unit ends up hiding in the woods until dusk. It will take them 2 days and a night to join the battle. As the Allies overwhelm German defenses and march inland, Hitler spends his day ordering V-1 revenge strikes not on Normandy but on London, then holds a conference with minor functionaries. When Goebbels shows him the Normandy landings on a map, Hitler exclaims with delight, "Just where we expected them." Goebbels, who has heard Hitler rant for months about how the Allied target would be Calais, simply nods at the Führer's historical revisionism. After all, Hitler is somewhat right, in a way. They all knew that a diversionary landing would happen at Normandy. Probably best to keep the strong units in Calais. Meanwhile, the Atlantic Wall is crumbling. Even at Omaha, the defense has degraded. Ammunition is running out. Artillery emplacements fall silent. Americans begin breaking through and enveloping the casements. At Caen, the Germans see one last opportunity, a gap between the Canadian and British lines. A grenadier regiment rushes to exploit it, and by 8 p.m. radios that they're on the beach. With armored support, they can hold. But the Allies have gotten wise. When the 21st Panzer tries to follow, they find themselves running a gauntlet. Fire pours in from both sides. Every minute, another tank explodes. Seeing that the window of opportunity has closed, their commander orders them to halt and dig in around Caen. But the defense is stiffening. All along the battlefront, Allied units begin failing their first-day objectives of advancing and linking up inland. By dusk, the Allies have scattered beachheads, but not much more. Within days, German reinforcements will arrive, and the hedgerows of Normandy will become a killing field that will dwarf the casualties of the landings. D-Day is over, but Operation Overlord could still fail. To win, the Allies are going to have to push just as hard on D-Day +1, and D-Day +2, and every day after that. For all of these forces, American, British Commonwealth, French, German, and Soviet, the fight would continue for 11 murderous months. But the Allies now had a beachhead, and in trying to throw them back, Germany would spend more men, fuel, and equipment that they could ill afford. Allied victory is a long way off, but for the first time, it's in sight.
Okay. Yeah, again, I'm with Rommel on this, that the Atlantic Wall and the beachheads is really the game, right? If that goes, if beachheads are formed, if the Allies get a footing in France, it's essentially over. Now you can hold out and you can take as many lives as you can and things like that, but it's, the wound is mortal at that point. And so that was a really good series, the D-Day series by Extra History. This was from the German perspective. I'm not sure when I'm going to get the next video out yet. Like I said, the Bismarck series is coming up. The Sabaton split song, where one part is Swedish and one part is English. I'm going to get to that. So look for those. They'll be out soon. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel over here, and I will see you all next time.